Hi, and welcome to Post-Burnout.com interviews. Post-Burnout.com is a culture website dedicated to venerating burnt-out artists the world over. My name is Aaron Kavanagh, and I'm the website's founder and editor-in-chief. This is our website's podcast where we interview people from various artistic disciplines. These episodes are sometimes full-length interviews from our site's articles and other times exclusives. If you're a returning listener, thanks for coming back. And if you're new here, thanks for checking us out. We hope you'll like it and stick around with us. In this edition of Post-Burnout.com interviews, we speak with brothers Abner and Harper James of the Taylor Swift-approved New York duo 8090. They discuss their recently released self-titled album, how despite their annual releases since 2016 they don't feel prolific, how they became musicians and how the project started, why they decided to self-title their latest record, how their latest record is a spiritual reset for the project, storytelling and getting personal in their music, and more.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Yeah. First thing I wanted to ask quite simply was I wanted to get a little bit of your background as a musician. So my understanding was as you were growing up, there was actually like instruments around the house. So I believe your parents were musicians. So I was wondering what were you kind of playing, and what were you sort of like? What was your first instrument?
Yeah, you want me to take this?
Yeah, go for it, Evs.
I'm Abner, by the way. That's Harper. Um, so it's the way it's told to me, at least by the parents, is that they were living in New York at the time, and my dad had kind of grown up as like a enthusiast, a blues harmonica enthusiast, because his parents, he was raised outside of New Orleans, and his parents didn't want him to grow up to be a musician, so he had to like sneak his harmonica playing in the car. Well,
It's like bringing a pack of cigarettes or something.
yeah, exactly.
I think actually probably from the age of 13 or whatever.
Yeah. Um, and then along the way he got interested in drums too, and kind of as like somewhere in between a joke and a gift, my mom got him when they were first together a little Casio keyboard with a drum pad on it, because that could fit in the like apartment that they're in. And that, I think, that languished for a while, and then allegedly, when I was 3 or 4, I kind of stumbled across it somehow, and started kind of sitting in front of like Disney movies, basically trying to kind of pick out the songs, and then from there, just kind of being enthusiastic about kind of pursuing that. And they're really musical people too, and like they always had record albums on, or Tom Petty, or it was always kind of going on in the house. I don't know about you.
No, I think I was more like, hanging out with friends in middle school who were playing me CDs, that they thought were cool. And at some point, I think that my dad at some point in college, I think, was in a band, and he had this. I actually still have it. It's a Fernandez. It's basically there was some company in Japan that was knocking off Fender stuff, and I think they probably got sued at some point when, but they're not existing. But this Fernandez guitar, which is over there, I've strung it as a Nashville guitar now. But and I think I learned how to play Wonderwall on it from a book, and that was sort of the beginning of the end or whatever. I got really into jazz guitar in high school, sort of obsessively. And just through a sequence of events, like wound up studying. Then I was like a jazz school dropout, and then I found my way into studio situations from just playing with bands, and kind of at some point realized I really loved that side of the glass.
Yeah.
And so now I work out of our little studio in Brooklyn and make records.
I think it's interesting about what you guys were saying is that like it seemed like you guys started with electrical instruments and then worked backwards to acoustic, where for most people it's the other way around. I was wondering how you think that kind of like influenced your outlook, I guess, on music.
Well, I think Abs, it's funny. I think that the initial legendary Casio keyboard with the drum pad on it, I think it was intended as a drum gift, but I believe, Admiral, you went right and used it as a piano, right? Yeah, so it was sort of a hop, skip, and a leap to Abner sort of getting into piano when he was really little, and that was your first kind of instrument. And I think for me it was less of the electricness of the guitar, I think, and just like the guitar itself. And there's a kind of like a weird mystery to untangling the weird setup of guitar as an instrument, right? In the way that the piano goes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and then just repeats. The guitar has, 5 different instances of each octave's note. So there's like 5 middle C's on the guitar, and they're all in random places, And so from there, you can imagine there was a kind of like almost like, obsessive quality to my interest in untangling that mystery, which sort of took me through the next, 10 years of my life or whatever. And that was a gateway to just the wider world of music and playing with other people. And, but yeah, I think electric guitar was always my main thing. And since like in recent years, I've been like really into like acoustic playing and just the way that acoustic guitars can be used on records to do different things. Like it's so interesting how they can be like, pop, country, folk, Woody Guthrie, Taylor Swift. Like there's, even though it's just this one thing, there's so many different versions of acoustic guitars and ways they can be used that definitely like, there is that kind of tension between all the technology we have now and just those core classic sounds that people sort of can't get over, like the human voice, acoustic guitars, pianos, drums, like all those things, they just stay, right? So yeah.
And then as you guys were kind of like growing up, I mean, like, what would you say were like the kind of like commonalities you guys had in terms of what you were listening to, and what would you say were the divergences?
Yeah, I think, and I think it's feels related to Harper, what you were talking about kind of untangling the guitar. I think I loved the piano partly because of how straightforward it was, and I liked being able to kind of imitate the whole symphony on it, the bass, the middle, that you could kind of create whatever you wanted to do. You had all the pieces you needed for a complete thing. And I think that so for me, it became pretty quickly about kind of compositional stuff and melodies and trying to kind of make music with the playing of the instrument almost as like a secondary thing a lot of the time. And I think like to me that felt like kind of a natural evolution into kind of an interest in songwriting. And Harper, I feel like you're still untangling. It's just like EQ patterns and snare plugins now instead of like the 10 middle C's, but it feels like really like a similar kind of a through line for those two things.
I think another way to put it too is like you're always interested in storytelling. Yeah. So like you're like Tom Petty, Paul McCartney, Noel Gallagher, John Mayer, Chris Martin, like the people who are these storytellers, and music always felt like your vehicle for storytelling. I mean, the first things you ever learned were like scores to movies, right? Like there's this, and I think for me, I was always interested in sort of like world building. Like I like to listen to music where there were these like weird, eccentric, like soundscapes or worlds that were created. So like, like indie stuff like Pavement, and then like this Sparkle Horse and Mark Linkus, these kind of like weird bedroom producery or indie sort of artists who were like doing sound stuff. And so I think I was less interested in just sort of the storytelling part and more of the sort of accompaniment. Like, so I think in some ways that is what our band is, like Abner tells the stories and I place them in the setting, and I think that's been the overwhelming dynamic, right?
For you, Harper, what was your first kind of like production sounds like? Was it soundscapes or was it like field recordings or what was it exactly that you were doing?
It's funny. Like I think that in the beginning, when I was a kid, I'm the classic thing. We got like a Roland 8-track. It was like a little digital 8-track with like one of those zip drive, like some drive in it, that I can never quite figure out how to move to a computer. But it was like bands. Like I was in bands, and I would be the person who would like just put up some mics aimed at stuff, and then we'd all like play as loud as we could. But I just remember, you get like there's sort of two kinds of musicians. The ones who are just like, I don't know what those buttons are for. Please somebody else press them so I can like take a solo. And then there's like me, who's just like, all I wanted to do is like figure out how this worked, and listening to like, well, why do the drums sound like that when I do this and that when I do this, and just, and this was like decades when I was just a little kid before I actually thought that I wanted to be like a producer or an engineer. But I think it tapped into this like even though I've always sort of done music in the context of storytelling, like I love working with artists who are really into the lyrics and the storytelling part because it's something to basically play against.
Yep.
I've never been that interested in sort of like doing just pure ambient music or scoring because I feel like it's almost too much freedom. Like I like having to play against something, or else I just would just get lost in my own mind, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, totally. And what would you kind of like been starting on? Like, would you been using digital audio digital audio.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
What's the W again?
So DAW,
DAW.
digital audio workstation.
Workstation.
Yeah,
Couldn't think
yeah,
of
yeah.
it. What would have been your
Yeah.
first one that you kind of like were
I didn't
messing
know
with?
that.
No,
Yeah,
just because
and it's like
I had a brain
yeah,
just blank on
totally.
the W.
No, it's fine. I honestly, you caught me on a good morning. I've had a little coffee, so I could remember. But that wasn't until much later because it's funny. I had these early like recording friends experiences in like lower school, middle school, and I sort of didn't. I was always fun, and thinking back, I'm like it totally makes sense that that was my role, like in the band. The guy who had the. But it wasn't until after college when I actually started basically assisting at this studio, um, that I learned Pro Tools because that was what the studio had basically. And I dabbled in like some other ones in college, but again, it was almost more just like I couldn't even. I think it was probably Ableton or Logic, but I just it was just a tool for me so I could like play some music into it. I really wasn't thinking like I wanted to be an engineer at that point at all. And so the first one I really learned was Pro Tools, and I'm pretty agnostic. That's just the one I know.
Yeah. And when I talk to people who kind of like during the COVID pandemic kind of had to start self producing because they didn't have the option to go
Yeah,
to like a production studio, I noticed
yeah,
that like a lot of them felt that something that, as you were kind of mentioning, that they felt initially was just kind of like the mechanical side of making music actually was an extension of the creative arm in a way. Yeah, I was
yes.
wondering like for both of you guys, I mean, how do you find that production adds that extra layer of quality in terms of obviously not just like making it sound better, but just like in terms of actually elevating the music itself.
Deepening the kind of story. Abs, you talk about it. I feel like you weirdly
Yeah.
have probably have a better sense than me.
Yeah, no, totally. Because I mean, I definitely came from the other side of it, which was like you have a song, you record it, and if it's good, it is, I didn't really draw as much of a distinction between the song existing in my head and in ether and or actually recording it. And I think interestingly, it really it connected for me. I mean, when we really started working together, that I studied film in college for a little bit before I went to New York, and the metaphor of like the producer as the director, as like the film director, and so you have a script and you maybe have a cast if you have a song in a band, and the producer is really the person that is going to be like, well, how are we going to tell this story? What are the most important things? Like, what are the themes? What's the world that this is happening in? And I think like um, just the context being so important to actually participating in like the creation of the meaning of what the song actually even means. Even when I think about lyric writing, I'm like, the words "I love you" really mean something different over a minor chord than they do a major chord,
Yeah.
right? Like you can just feel that. And I think when you're figuring out how to produce a song or what sounds to use, like the song isn't done until you make those decisions because they really impact and shape the actual way. I'll hear songs when we're done with them, or Harper will have an idea, and it'll be so interesting because he has heard a little bit of a different meaning to the song than I had, but suddenly I'm like, oh, I think maybe actually he was clearer about what this meant than I was because I'm too close to it. And in retrospect, this is sad, or this isn't as sad, or whatever it is, And so I think like that, really realizing that the song isn't finished until it's a record.
Yeah.
It's funny because I feel like it's like as a producer, you're actually working to do the opposite thing, which is what you're trying to do is imagine what the artist is feeling when they're writing it and making sure that when it's presented to the outside world, other people have access to that feeling. But of course, what inevitably happens is you interpret it.
Yeah.
And so then if the artist likes your interpretation of the song, then you've actually created something new, but then you still have to make sure whatever that collaborative sort of idea of what the song is then gets across. So I think in some ways, like I'm basically connecting the artist with the listener, and so that
Yeah.
they can talk to each other through the song. And yeah, and in fact, I think a lot of this style of like what I'm producing or whatever comes not in terms of like I like this genre or that genre, but just case by case trying to say, how am I going to make it clear to someone else who didn't write the song, who didn't live the story, what this emotional experience is supposed to feel like? Um, and in doing that, all other kinds of funny stuff happens. Like you change the meaning of the song and you change the style of the song and whatever. But those are almost unintentional side effects, but welcome side effects.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting if you listen to like sometimes like different producers will do remix of the song and you just like
Yeah.
totally hear how the atmosphere changes, how the
Yes.
just the placement of everything changes, like and it's technically the same song, but it's not really. I always find that like very fascinating. Just like an experiment to just say here it kind of going like here's a familiar
Yeah.
song, or even like something like you were saying, Abner, just kind of like playing a song that's normally played in the major key in the minor, just like totally changes like not only the mood of the song, but even the kind of interpretation of the lyrics themselves.
Yes.
It's really interesting how music
Yeah.
works like that.
Well, one of the tricks I feel like as a producer, when you feel like a song isn't quite finished, but you don't want to go and start meddling with the lyrics and the melody and the rhythm, is reharmonizing stuff, like where you just swap out a few chords. And it's kind of amazing, like where you change like one or two chords in a certain way, and like all of a sudden the song is like a different genre. The chorus works. That you understand the meaning of the lyrics on the second verse
Yeah.
now, when before they were just going over your head. Like it can be scary how easy it is to change something intentionally or unintentionally. And when you get a really good song, it's funny when I get something maybe that needs a little more work, you can sort of roll up your sleeves and be a little reckless, right? You can kind of like mess things up and turn things around, and maybe you arrive at something really cool. When I get a song that's like amazing, just standing on its own, the overwhelming feeling is like, don't F this up.
Yeah.
Like it's like, don't breathe wrong because you could mess this up. And I think those are the more challenging. Ironically, the most challenging stuff is when the song really speaks for itself. So you're just trying to like move it from here to here without breaking it,
Yeah.
basically. And that's
You're
a lot
delicately.
harder, than when you're like, I don't know, eventually this will be cool. Let's like, punch it up a little bit. So, and a lot of times Abner songs are kind of like that. I
Yeah.
really, I mean, we're brothers, but I think just, my initial reason for being in a band was I was like, I just think these songs are great. They should be out there, so.
Yeah. And Abner, actually, as a songwriter, I want to ask like how you got involved, because you were sort of saying like you began kind of like trying to emulate the melodies of the Disney movies you were listening to, which I assume would kind of be like Hal Ashby kind of songs, if I'm correct. So yeah, I mean, obviously, like they're like very emotive. They're like almost like pitch perfect, like calculated to like a T of like here's how to move people in the way we want them to. Yeah, I was
Yes.
wondering then, like when it kind of came, you mentioned the kind of like the singer songwriters that you started listening to afterwards, um kind of like, I don't know, trying to, I guess, kind of blend that sort of like, I don't know, perfected kind of music to the kind of idiosyncratic nature of like those singer songwriters, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I feel like, yeah, I'm always have been drawn to kind of like big, almost more like symbolic kind of sweeping arcs that melodically stories, like the movies that I liked. And I think that also, you know, the I find like the difference between, it's always about trying to walk the line between universal like and cliche,
Right.
right? And I think sometimes in the beginning, especially when I was first writing songs, I'd be like, oh, I like these, but they kind of feel like anyone could have written them, and that's not really like what I find interesting in the artists that I like. And I think for me, what it's trying to do is kind of what I'm trying to do, talking my way through this a little bit, is I think, but is be really, really kind of granular and authentic about charting my particular course, like through those more kind of sweeping, maybe archetypal feelings, whether it's like narrative.
Experiences.
And so it's kind of like being really like, well, what did this, not that the songs are all verbatim based on my life, but in terms of the moments and the emotions, thinking like, what was it really like in the room? You know, what was I really feeling? And why am I drawn to kind of hanging these experiences on this more like archetypal or kind of sweeping thematic thing, whether it's like you know what I was saying? And I think the artists that are really great at doing that were the ones that I love, especially growing up, you know, YouTube.
Well, I always think about the archetype for you is Paul McCartney, where like the goal is you somehow have this like line into the most universally loved and accepted melodies and stories and frameworks, and are simultaneously like insanely weird and personal. Like when you listen to, like, we think of Paul McCartney as basically like, you know, the inventor of modern popular contemporary music. I mean, in terms of recording techniques, in terms of playing the bass, in terms of being a songwriter, in terms of being a lyricist, in terms of being a singer. You know, you think of like Blackbird as like, without that song, there's so many singer-songwriters who like don't even exist, right?
Yeah.
And yet you actually look at what he's saying and it's almost sometimes like indecipherably cryptic or weird or personal or just nonsensical.
Yeah.
And I always felt like that's the perfect combination. I mean, it's like why, to me, the Beatles are basically, they're not good or bad. They're simply the benchmark that we use to measure whether a certain kind of art is successful. Basically, how much, like, how close to the Beatles is this is another way of saying how good is this in a lot of contexts, right? So, like, I don't know, maybe not to put words in your mouth, but I feel like right, like as like an archetype for singer-songwriters. I mean, I think he's great because he's very specific. He's such a unique person, individual, creative person, but also somehow he just has this almost like mystical way of knowing what is going to feel universal to people, what everyone is going to be able to identify with. And it's not about cliches, right? It's about some other sense, you know,
well,
like a sixth sense.
Of course, like on the one, everyone's life is totally different. The idea that there are universal things that happen to everyone actually isn't true. Nothing the same ever happens to anybody. At the same time, all of our lives are basically exactly the same.
Yeah.
Right. And so
we want the same things. We have the same fears.
Yeah. What is my version of those things that everyone feels? That's kind of, I think, what I'm humbly trying.
I just like plugging Paul McCartney at every opportunity I get. For others, like, the older you get, the more the Beatles are awesome.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I don't know, Paul McCartney. That's for others in my immediate family to say, but no.
Yeah.
I've never heard these guys. I should check them out. The Beatles. Okay.
The Beatles. Yeah. It's actually spelled differently than you'd think.
Oh,
it's
no.
Yeah. Be careful out there.
I had a question for you as well, Abner. It was you were talking about like you're studying film, and I wonder actually does the kind of visual language of film, which like people would study, did that kind of influence you? Because like, you know, obviously you learn about, I just took film as a module. It wasn't my full degree, but like you learn about things like montage, and you learn about editing, and you learn about like pacing and things like that. And also just like in general, when you kind of like do a breakdown of a screenplay, it's very interesting because like essentially a screenplay is just like a screenwriter trying to communicate the ideas or trying to transcribe the ideas in their head onto paper so that other people will understand it. I wonder, did any of that kind of influence your songwriting in the process too?
I think like hugely, actually. I think, and in fact, in certain ways, I kind of, well, two things. I kind of joke, but also I'm not sure if it's a joke that like I left film school and to do this band because like I understood that the kinds of like movies that I would really want to do, like two people get to do, you know, no one's going to give you $500 million to make it, but that you create worlds that felt that big and were that big, like in music, in a way that actually seemed like something that was maybe feasible that you could do, especially now, like on your own. And I think for me, like just in particular, my songwriting is, I think about screenplays a lot when I'm doing that, in terms of, you know, what details are going to be the most efficient, you know, to start as close to the climax as you can, you know, with all the information you don't need, you know, everything you need. It's all about efficiency and like how how much meaning can you cram into every moment so you're not wasting any time, and the pacing and the screenplays are so structured in the way that, like, you know, a pop song kind of is structured. It doesn't mean you necessarily have to abide by that structure to the letter every time, but I think being aware of it when you're making choices really helps you fit into, like, basically a language that people are pretty fluent in, so they can understand what you're saying. And a lot of times, for me, one of my favorite pieces of creative advice that I ever got that has always stayed with me was from my screenwriting teacher, that basically said endings need to be surprising when they happen and inevitable in retrospect. Right. And I'm always trying to basically be like, at the end of this song, like, was this surprising when it happened, but inevitable when you look back, whether it's like the meaning or like a turn of phrase or something that feels. But I think the short answer to your question is totally. I almost think of them as like little mini screenplays in the way that, like,
yeah. And yeah, Abner's talked about this like a lot. We talk about this a lot, actually. And I remember an interesting conversation talking about how, you know, both pop music and screenplays are incredible. They're taught in a way where there's actually almost like a formal structure to what you need to do. So like in music, it would be, right, like verse, pre-chorus, chorus, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge, chorus. And it's like, so if you don't really know how to write a song, do that and you'll be safe.
Yeah.
And right. But I think part of it is, like, as you realize, the more that you internalize the reasons for that structure, which is really more about contrast and pacing, then you don't need to actually verbatim use it. But it's like you're stepping off of the path a little bit at that point. And so, like, I think it's true with everything, production, mixing, writing. There's all of these rules that are like fail safes. Like, it's like, if you're not really sure what to do, this should probably work. But the goal is basically, right, to not need those rules. Yeah. And the fun is when you sort of step off the path, but you don't just get lost. You're like guided by intuition. But I think that's always the tension. And it's like, I don't think anyone is ever fully beyond the need for some of these crutches, but yeah, or maybe Paul McCartney, but you know, but yeah. So I think we talk about that a lot, especially when we're literally structuring songs. Like, we will do something like, maybe we start with a chorus, but you realize that has this whole downstream effect on like everything else, because it totally messes the pacing up. So you end up moving like verses after bridges, and then the bridge is really like a, you know, post, or, you know, like, so. But if you have an intuitive sense of pacing, you can kind of make your way through those things. And if you don't, then you kind of get lost, you know.
Yeah, I agree. I think like there is that kind of balance between like the instructions and the kind of like education versus the instinct and the intuition, as you were talking about. Like, you know, then you kind of end up with like a film like Citizen Kane, or an album like the White Album, you know.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yes. But of course, I think, like, and this is like a great thing in jazz, where it's like the best sort of like avant-garde musicians are the ones who are the best formal musicians oftentimes. Yeah. Not always, but very often it's like people who just jump right into no rules. There's something that just feels lost about it. And people who have fully internalized all of the rules and then totally break them, you know, I mean, it's a cliche, but you can still feel, even though you can't discern what rules they're going by, there is a kind of pattern underlying, or there is a kind of structure.
They're in conversation, at least with what you kind of know.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
On some level.
Yes. Even if you don't speak the language, it's like, it is one. It has a grammar. It's just not maybe one that they told you about, but you can feel that it's there. Yeah. Anyway.
And then I want to ask, actually, so when it came to kind of actually starting this project, then, so obviously you guys are brothers, so I believe you kind of somewhat touched on it earlier, Harper, that like you just kind of liked Abner's music, and you kind of like wanted to aid him in that. When the idea come across of like doing it as a duo? And you've been releasing music like very consistently since 2016. I mean, like, your first single came out, I think, at the beginning of 2016. Then, like, only a few months later, you already had your first EP. There's a lot of I don't know, there's a lot of release in quick succession. I was wondering, like, where you just kind of like, you know, just have so much material that you just kind of like are struggling to get it all out, or.
You know, it's so funny to hear it said like that, because the first person experience was just like this epic monumental struggle, and just like the panic of, is this ever gonna, like, are we gonna ever be able to make anything again? Like, you know, every time for years, I think recently, it's like one of the benefits of doing something for a while, like some of the existential anxiety about, is this going to be the last thing I ever make that's that's halfway decent, sort of starts to go away because you've been through it enough times to know that if I just keep working, like, yeah, I'll probably get there. But I think the initial sort of like motivation, it really was, we had been sending like music back and forth forever and played a little music together here and there, but I didn't have the skills sort of like produce anything for a long time, so it was never really on the table. And I think I just always had in the back of my mind, and we always had in the back of our minds, we'd love to do something together, but it had never totally come together in a way that felt really right. I think part of the missing ingredient was we really just wanted to do it ourselves, and that required me to sort of start. It actually happened after I kind of had a little bit of production under my belt, and I felt a little more confident about being able to do it. And so I think it was sort of like as soon as I felt ready, like it just was a matter of time before Abner, I think you lost some freelance videographer gig, and I was like, I have an empty day at the studio. You should come by and we'll finally work on this song or whatever. And that was the first, song we did. And then I think since then, it's just been about exploring the world that we created. I think about it's sort of just like we talk about fleshing out a kind of world song by song, where it's like they all exist in this big network of people and places and ideas and sounds, but they're connected through us. And so I think it's just been about, exploring. And I feel like trying to find all the nooks and crannies where it's like, oh, here's a different way of doing our thing together that sounds totally new or whatever to us, but still makes sense in the context of the world. So it's that balance. But in terms of the being prolific or whatever, it's like I always feel like that we're late, I can't finish anything, nothing's working. And usually, we send something off to mastering like 3 hours after we're finally like we're done. And then we're just like, okay, we're done. Email mastering engineer, like, get it off my plate and everyone look at it again or whatever. But at least that's me. Admir's different. You actually like, once we put it out, to go listen to it sometimes, but I have a hard time. I just need to move on to the next thing, the next song.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Harper said, it was always something in the back of our minds that we wanted to do, that we kind of talked about informally. But when it kind of clicked when he had this space that he had been kind of started to work in, and we had the time that overlapped, and it was very non-pressured. We didn't have a song name till the song was done. Didn't have a band name till we decided to put the song out. Weren't going to put the song out unless we liked it. It was a very kind of
unofficial to the maximum degree.
Situation. And then I think when it came out and it kind of got some attention, it was just like a really encouraging say, like, keep doing this. This is something that like
I think Phoebe Bridgers said in an interview at some point, I don't know if this is her idea, but like that everything good starts as a joke.
Yeah.
And like I don't know if that's actually true, but I definitely feel the truth of that to some degree. But I think partly the reason is because when something's a joke, you let your guard down and you stop being affected by like, what are people going to think, being ashamed that something might be cheesy, like all this stuff that blocks us. When it's a joke, like I think some people are able to just sort of transcend that. Most people, you kind of need to like lower the stakes to be creative. And I think, that's a really hard thing to do, but I think that in some ways we accidentally freed ourselves by being kind of goofy about the inception of it. Like we were just like, oh, this would be funny. Why don't we combine like the weirdest, craziest things ever and do a little glitchy thing, ha ha ha. And then of course, once you realize that you have something, it starts to get a little more like, oh, maybe this is good. And you get serious about it. You forget that it was a joke. But like, I think there was a kind of initial, like really low stakes, have fun. We're not even going to put it out, just mess around vibe. And of course, once you decide you're in a band, it's very hard to capture that again. But I feel like we've been trying to do that, ever since.
And Abner, as somebody who's like very personal songwriter, again, like I don't know how much of like your lyrics that you were kind of mentioned are kind of like fictitious versus how much are real and how much are kind of personal. But obviously there's like a lot of like sincerity going into these lyrics. Did you find that kind of like low stakes kind of initial kind of arrangement to kind of help you, especially as it's your brother, it's someone you're familiar with? Or actually, was that kind of like intimidating, where it's like, well, this is, my brother, and I'm going to be like talking about some gnarly stuff?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it was, we like growing up together, we had one of the things about it that made it an easier collaboration was like we didn't have to develop any kind of shorthand like with each other. We already had that. We already had, and so many of our points of references were the same. We didn't have to kind of establish our dynamic in the way that I feel like you do a lot of times with creative partners. We kind of already had, so all the references were shared pretty much and all that stuff. And then I think, we, as far as like being vulnerable and in lyrics and all that stuff, I think we grown up writing songs, and for so long that part didn't feel new, I think, in a way, and so it was almost like not really something that that was really on my mind. I mean, I think with my lyrics, it's almost like the way I think about it is every individual line, it's true and happened to me and I felt, but if you put them all together, that particular iteration of all those lines in that song, the story that beat for beat makes, my, I wouldn't say when movies say based on a true story, and you Wikipedia it, they're like,
yeah.
I would say that would be
I can vouch for the fact that it's like you might have a song that's sort of about one person, but actually it's about two people, and you're sort of combining those narratives thematically to sort of talk about whatever the theme is. Yeah, exactly. Which I think is very common.
Something that would get you fired if you were writing for the Times, but I think it's acceptable if you're writing.
It's a memoir, not an autobiography.
Right. Yeah.
What's the literary term? Roman a cleef, I think, is the Latin term. Yeah, it's like
oh, there you go. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, talking about prolific, I mean, we're on the eve of your second album this year alone. Yeah, I was wondering, like, I mean, like, how did you have such like a quick turnaround, right, with two albums? And yeah.
Well, so the first one this year was a little bit of a cheat because it was a sort of retrospective with like 3 or 4 new songs. Okay. So like the songs on the record, about half of them were basically all of this music that we had out, that always wanted to be on an album, that because it was really part of an era, but we just didn't have the wherewithal or the time, and the distribution didn't work out to like do the whole album thing. And I think we maybe didn't have the confidence to for a while to be like, this is an album. And so it kind of felt like overdue. And what we discovered in putting these together was that there was actually a lot of material that was sort of from that time that had never made it out, because at the time, I don't think we really had the sort of skill set to finish it. So we liked it, but we just hit dead ends. That fortunately, it was like we were able to basically just blast through now because we've had so much more experience, which is kind of a nice thing. So it was like as far as I know, Abs, almost all of the songs that may be like a kind of interlude or whatever that we did were created in the same era, even though they were finished sort of over the span of some years. And then you can talk about the new record if you want.
Yeah,
that was just a push. That was just a lot of work.
Yeah,
and we do it all ourselves, up until the final iteration of mastering. But essentially, like, it's both a lot of work, but also it can be a quicker turnaround because there's not this massive layer of teams and people to wait for and mixing engineers to wait for. We just do it. So if we've got the time in our schedule, then we can just crack at it. But yeah, you can talk about the record.
Yeah, no, and I think partly, one of the reasons that we wanted to put out that the Bowery Beach Road like earlier this year before this record was that it felt like, I think in any other era before probably the mid 2010s, in terms of the way you release music and the way you whatever, this probably is our third record. We probably would have been Bowery Beach Road, then The Night Sky, and then this, in terms of the amount of songs we put out, the order we put out, the kind of story it tells about the band. And I think in certain ways, this album, even though it's our first kind of formal full-length record, it is definitely, I think, an evolution and a kind of a different take on our sound than what people might generally be used to. It's a lot more, I think, kind of raw, performance based. There's like less, more real drum kits, less
blips and bloops.
Yeah, exactly. Less blips and bloops,
as we say.
Exactly. And so I think it was kind of like, it's cool for us to kind of have the record out, and record in terms of the other meaning of it, like of the evolution of the sound getting to this point and having it feeling like, Bowery Beach Road is kind of probably what, if people ever think of 80/90, what they think of in terms of this sound.
Yep.
And that I think The Night Sky being a little bit, which is like the second longer EP that we put out, being a little bit more honest. Some of the songs were a little bit even further in the organic direction, and some were even further in the kind of electronic direction. And now this being like a bit more of almost, like I said, like definitely not live, but more full takes, more full vocal takes, more drum performances, more kind of, and I think that speaks
a little more bandy.
A little more bandy. And I think that speaks a little bit to partly just sonically kind of what we were getting into and interested in, but also the songs themselves that were coming out were a little bit more raw, a little bit more.
Also, the thing that I think about is the interest for me, like in doing more sort of imperfect performance-based like records, but that still feel like records where there's like aesthetic decisions being made from a sound point of view. Is there, and I found this one of the reasons we didn't do that earlier, because they're really hard to do, because you can't just make things perfect. Like, so perfection in anything in production is basically like a smokescreen for not really knowing what you want. Because if you don't really know what you want, you can just make it perfect, right? You can line everything up and you can make everything sound loud and whatever. But when you're working with stuff and the concession is this is not going to be perfect, then you actually have to dig pretty deep and say, okay, so if perfection isn't the goal, like what is the goal? And it becomes this way harder target. And I think just for me, I didn't have the confidence as a producer to sort of fully do stuff that was a little bit more just like letting things be, but still feel confident that it was an aesthetic statement and that we had curated something cool and worth listening to. And so I think, I don't know, I think partly just like we could, so we did, or at least I felt like maybe we could, so let's try it. And it was a fun experience, right? And we're both musicians originally, so doing everything on the computer, or a lot of stuff in the computer, was a cool whole other world that had opened up to us and a lot of people, over the last however many years. But eventually just getting in and playing bass, drums, guitar, singing was really fun, and got back to like the original reasons why we like music.
And I think I'm just thinking about what you're saying is interesting too. In certain ways, I think that felt like, right from my perspective with the songs, is that I think actually in certain ways, up until this record, the song, I mean, it's funny you talk about this and other people are going to be like, it all sounds the same. I don't know what you're talking about, but it sounds very to me, right? But that there, like when I was talking about, songs as screenplays, and there is a sense where you can kind of apply that same like perfectionism to songwriting, where you're like, well, this undeniably works in this certain way that you can kind of quantify. And there's something really satisfying about that. And I think like, we were kind of playing against playing those two approaches to, making things sonically like maybe a little bit slicker with these songs that were a little bit more like lyrically structured in that kind of narrative way. Whereas I think the songs that I found were kind of coming out this last year for one reason or another were just a little bit more, they were a little bit less like literal and a little bit less kind of tied up in a bow, like at the end, complete stories. Right. They were more kind of like, what are these feelings I'm feeling?
Fragments.
A little uncomfortable, like what and so I think that like the idea of, I don't know, maybe it was intuitive on Harper's part, but of pairing those songs with that more perfectionist production wasn't really going to work, I think, because the
Yeah.
songs themselves didn't deal in those emotions in the same way. You know,
Yeah.
veering outside of Disney Plus into A24 territory. Humbling, yeah, like living the doll or something in a way that in a way that was just a new thing for us. And I think, cool. I think not to say one, we prefer one to the other, and I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen next, but I think that it all just kind of, and I think for me, I felt like you were pulling in that direction too. And I was like, cool, this would be the time for me to go there then.
No, totally. Well, I think the truth is too, that this stuff wouldn't have worked. Like doing an indie rock song with some of the other older songs, like just would have been wrong. And I think we both knew that.
Like swooping cameras for that stuff, and with this, it's like more appropriate. It feels like
in a strange way. I mean, that kind of like ambiguity that you were talking about, where it's like, I don't have a complete answer. I don't have everything in a neat little bow. I mean, it's kind of a sign of maturity in a way, because like I think like, again, maybe going somewhat full circle, when you're kind of like influenced by, like, as you mentioned, kind of like Disney films, where it's like, very binary between good and evil, and like, here's how everything is. And then I mean, as you kind of grow up in the world, you just kind of realize, like, I don't know, I don't have the answers to everything.
Yeah. Right. You think you've been making things, trying to make them perfect, but actually that's not actually what's been going on, right? It's just mostly anxiety manifesting in control and need to control versus letting things be what they are and just subtly kind of pushing them in that direction or that direction, but knowing that really, like, you're not really ever in total control of anything. So you can kind of just like let that idea go and just sort of hope that things kind of work out in ways where you're getting some cool stuff sometimes, Yeah.
You guys have been very gracious for your time. I just have a few more questions before we wrap up. I wanted to ask, actually, you were talking about kind of like the more kind of band kind of oriented music in this. Now, obviously, when like I saw a live performance that you guys were doing, and you had to you had like a full band with you. I was wondering, like, I mean, like, up until now, I mean, like the music, as you were saying, because it was to you, was very streamlined, and you could kind of do things at your own pace and have things ready when you had them ready. I was wondering now, do you think like having bringing additional members in, like, do you think that complicates things, or is it still kind of the same process for you guys?
Well, we say band, but we played all the instruments, so it's still, but with the exception maybe of some, my sort of way in terms of thinking about recording and collaboration is like, one of the great things about, living in Brooklyn and being in the producer musician scene is you meet all these people with all of these different talents, right? And like, like I have artists that I produce who actually also do string arrangement stuff, or I have, other engineers who like really do ambient stuff, and thinking about using people for what they're great at, right? Like allowing people to come and bring the thing that they do so well. So like on on some songs where we've collaborated with my friend Gian, he's like an incredible pop producer. He does like drum programming, like just at this level or whatever. And so when we have a song where like that, feels like the move, it's like bringing people in to do the thing they're great at. And then you come and you do the thing, you do. And so I think that's sort of always been the approach, but basically, sorry, one second. But basically, as we sort of, just do more, and I think we become more open to like bringing people in.
Yeah,
because it's sort of like we're confident enough in what we do that bringing someone in isn't going to like wreck it all. It's like we know how to kind of incorporate stuff, because that is its own art, right? It's not, early on collaborations can almost feel very disorienting because it's something new and you don't know how to work with it, and now there's this other person involved. But I think as we kind of get a little more confident in what we're doing, we can allow it to be kind of like, messed up in a good way by someone coming in and doing their thing. And so we've definitely done that with production and writing and mixing to some degree, but it's been fairly minimal. But I can see that that's sort of opening up as we keep working, because, you just get bored of working with the same two people over and over again too. So yourself included,
And right. I think as far as performing and stuff goes, one of the things that we kind of talked about is that, like, we never obviously think about like how would we do this live when we're producing? Because we don't want to be like constrained by that at all.
Yeah.
And then it's more like when we think about how do we bring the records to the stage, I think it's less like how do we replicate this exact experience and then just move it onto the stage. It's almost more like, okay, to use the metaphor again, we're adapting this movie to a play.
Yeah.
So on the stage, what are the important things here, and how do we get those across, whether that means arranging it so a guitar part is playing a piano part instead because it's supposed to feel mellow. It's more like that conversation.
Yep.
It is like, okay, now we need 3 other people because there's an organ, a bass, and everything. It's like, well, no, maybe now we reimagine the organ line, so I'll just play backing on the acoustic and the bass will be going to the tracks or whatever it is, as long as the basic stuff is.
Yeah, I think a mistake you can make setting up a live show is thinking that the best thing is when you get every single thing on the album to play exactly like it would in someone's headphones, because it won't. And most of what happens in like a rock venue, the detailed backing tracks or just get lost in the shuffle. And I always feel like it's about focusing all of the energy on making sure the really key things actually come through clearly. And that's like the better experience for the audience, right? Hear the vocals, have the feel big and good, if that's the vibe, get that key part happening. Because in a live venue, I mean, it's loud, there's talking, it's like the third layer of synths.
Yeah.
I don't find that to be a super important detail, but I think it means that, the live show is literally its own project, and it can be anything, as long as the core thing of the band or the song sort of comes across in a way that feels right.
Yeah. One of the fun things I'll ask you is just actually something you were talking about, Abner, I thought was very interesting. You were talking about like, because you guys have kind of like full dictation of your music, you were able to kind of dictate the order in which the albums came out on. Yeah, I was wondering in a similar way, I mean, because like I think that's kind of like, as you mentioned, the kind of like the story of your band in a way. If you're looking at the chronology of releases, that is the story of your band. On a kind of meta level, do you think that like it's sort of like real world storytelling almost with the arrangement?
Yeah, you mean in terms of like the sequencing of everything and the way
So I mean, again, like it's a similar thing, like almost in a real life example where you're kind of like because you have that kind of like creative freedom that you're able to, I don't know, basically tell your own story the way you want to, if that makes sense.
100%.
Yeah, I have thoughts. Yeah, I mean, so basically, like originally we had this idea that we didn't quite do it, but I think it's sort of like the underlying inspiration that when I said we're creating a world, it's like it's almost like each album is sort of like a place or a stage of life. So there's a real sense of like taking people on a physical kind of trip through spaces. And like I think like the order of the records, right? It's like it's abstracted from an actual story, but the funny thing is there are actual people and places in the songs, and like they're anonymous for like most songs, right? But they are real, and so in my mind there is a kind of like actual trip through time and through places, where you live, where you've traveled, where you've been, who you knew. And there's recurring places and people too, and recurring stories that are then seen like through a different light later on, right? When you're looking back. And so like, yeah, I mean, and I think like one of the cool things about sort of DIYing everything is that you can really put that first. So it's like, we're going to order these records in a way that makes sense creatively, not because the distributor has to blah, 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 and this person needs it to be blah, 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 and the contract says we have to, so right, that stuff can get very tangled, as far as I know from a lot of the clients I have who are doing things where there's formal contracts, but we can sort of be like, we're going to like do a retrospective album, predate it to when the songs were actually written, and then follow up with the album, because that actually just makes a lot more creative sense than having a bunch of songs written, 5 years ago come out after our new album. Like that would be weird. So yeah, no, I mean, it's been one of the benefits. And I think whether or not it was always, like intentional, I think we just instinctively just sort of need to have a certain amount of creative control, or the project becomes not fun. Now, the reason that for doing it sort of goes away, basically.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, well,
and these things are a marathon, you know, not a sprint, as they say.
Because I was kind of thinking like what because we're kind of mentioning earlier people like the Beatles and Bob Dylan, and you look at like their discographies, and it seems like anyone who's like written about them since has kind of used the sequence of their discography as the means of telling basically their story as a musician.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, like
Yes.
I think it's actually the release order is more important than a lot of people might give it credit for, if that makes sense.
100%. No. It was like we were like, this has to be the thing. This has to be how we do it. It would drive us absolutely insane to have really old songs coming out and people thinking that that's what we had just worked on, and it would tell a weird. I think it would be weird for people because there's something very obvious. I mean, I don't know, for people. For me, it would be weird to me about like, well, these clearly it doesn't make sense that they would do this and then just now do these songs which sound really like that. So anyway, no, very intentional. Yeah, perfect. And important to us, I think.
And the fun thing I'll ask is, why did you decide to self-title this next record?
Abner.
Yeah, I think it's funny. It was definitely more of an intuitive decision than it was. We were going back and forth on album titles, and then I kind of just had this thought, like, I feel like this should be self-titled. And Harper was like, cool, and we were like, okay,
yeah.
Self-titled. I think that, one thing to me, there's two, when I look at bands' discographies and I see self-titled albums, there really are two kinds. There's like the statement as in, this is who we are as a band. If you think about us, think about this one. And a lot of times it's like the first record or whatever. Right. And then there's the kind of, this is still us. I'm thinking of like Paramore's self-titled record or something that came out, where it is almost sometimes it's the outlier.
Yeah.
Don't worry, it's still us. Or also, this is who we are. Like,
yes.
Right. And I think for me, it just felt kind of like, and it's also, it's been a long time coming in certain ways. It's like, we can say like, well, we basically released other albums, but really this is the first time we're saying, hey, we're releasing an album and the album is coming out and it's an album. And so it also felt kind of like we're doing it,
Yeah.
It's like, This is
yeah. No, it's funny.
Also, I would say one thing is it does feel. I feel like every artist says this about every album that's ever been released, but in certain ways, the most personal.
Yeah.
The most personal without kind of any the sheen of a story inspired by kind of more of like a journal.
One of the things I think that like I've learned about creativity is that trying really hard isn't actually the thing.
Right.
And I think in some like level, to me, this album is just what happened when we made a record.
Yeah.
Rather than having this really like, we have to make a great, like, and I think in some ways, like, I'm very pleased with the result. And so when Abner was saying, it's like, there's this is us as a statement, and then there's the like, this is just us. And I think it's more that it's just like, yep, this is what the band is when we just do the thing. Does that make sense, Abs?
Yeah,
there's a kind of casual ease to the process and an honesty about like what we actually like and what we're interested in, and and less of a kind of contrived sort of thing we're trying to present to the world.
Yep.
Maybe. Yes, and that was Barry Beach Red, where there was a lot of intentional, like we wanted to present a certain kind of thing, and we were very interested in crafting meticulously the exact experience that someone would have. And now I think I'm sort of like, I'm more interested in doing a process that feels right and fun and free and natural and easy or easeful, not stressful and ambitious and targeted. It's a very different feeling. So there's a kind of like ironic casualness to the self-titled thing of the album, even though it can be done in this kind of like grandstanding way, like here we are. Like, that was not my vibe around it. I don't think it was weirdly the opposite of like, this is here we are.
It sounds like almost kind of like some of like a spiritual debut almost. It's like,
I like it. A spiritual debut.
I like think so, actually. No, maybe I like that way of putting it.
Yeah.
Yes.
The final thing I'll ask, 2024, just around the corner. What do you guys have coming up for the new year?
I mean,
So,
yeah.
well, one would be our very first Christmas song,
Okay.
which is something that Abner,
Well, that's
this
technically still
song,
going to be this year, not in the new year.
it'll be this year. Sorry. You're right. That's okay. The 21st. So you go. So yeah,
Well, if you still have more for 2023, absolutely.
yeah, exactly. No, but that's it's Abner had this really sweet. I mean, you call it a Christmas. It's like a holiday song or whatever, but like this really sweet song he'd written years ago. But kind of was like, I don't know, a Christmas song. What are we gonna do with that? But he finally sent me like an updated version of it, and I was like, oh, this is really, I feel like that sort of holiday music thing. I always like it when it's really sincere
Yeah.
and sweet versus kind of like kitschy and jingly or whatever. It's cheesy. So anyway, so that'll be fun. But yeah, 2024. I mean, we were talking about it this morning. I'm just going to go. You do your thing.
No, I was just saying, it's funny because I think every year we're always like, this is the year we're going to be prolific. That's like, and it's funny to hear you say that because I feel like even this year, I feel like we didn't put out as much stuff as I wanted to put out. But I feel like having that conversation earlier just about just jumping on the next thing, like, really quickly.
Immediately.
And really just fully leaning in and taking advantage of the fact that, like, we can, like, we don't have people telling us we got to wait for this album cycle to be done before we can, and just like try to just get into a groove where we're just always putting out music. And then that is something that, like, I think this process helped get us towards.
For me, it's like the year of not being precious, the year of just making things and putting things out. And I think that's been like a journey for us through. And I think last year was the first year we kind of let go of the sort of like controlling nature of the creative process enough to actually be a little prolific, in my mind, or like to be to be more prolific, or however you want to put it. But I'm sort of like, it felt really good, and I was just saying we have something in the works, and it was like the fastest anything's come together, right? Like for a future release that we currently we're for a few days. And I was like, yeah, I feel like we're finally in a place where there's something about the process that feels natural and easy and is not beset by self-doubt, anxiety, second guessing, all that stuff. It seems like, knock on wood, that may be exiting stage left. So like, hopefully this year will be the year of just making a bunch of stuff and not thinking too hard about it.
Perfect. Thanks very much for your time, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh, great.
That was really fun. Like, great interview. Like, thank you so much for the thoughtful questions and the great conversation. It was awesome. Yeah. No, it's clear. Thank you.
Thanks very much, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Of course.
You too.
Talk soon.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you for listening to that episode of Post-Burnout.com interviews. If you liked it, please subscribe and stick around because we have plenty more like this coming soon.